there's this idea of I have a vision, and God's doing something, and I'm so excited about it, but then that whole plan of what I thought God was going to do, it dies, and I have no idea what's going on. And it feels like all my plans, and it feels like the plans that I had for God are all shot and falling apart, and what's going to happen in my life? And then God steps in and He says, let me provide, let me do something. And so today, as we talk about that, I hope it's an encouragement to you, an encouragement that God really is at work in our lives. And I want to start off by just sharing a little bit of a story with you. And that story happens to do with this place right here. And now for some of you, you were around when all this happened. But for many of you, probably most of you, you were not around. And it was back in the 80s when the church, how many of you here today were a part of, well, it was Berean Bible Church at the time. Berean Bible Church, back when this church moved from Moline down there to move to Byron Center. How many of you here today were a part of all that? So you can see quite a good number of people here. It was back in the 80s when the church decided, you know what? Moline is a dying town. And if you go down there, they have barely anything there anymore. And yet Frontline, or Berean Bible Church at the time, was there from back in the 30s. And as the 80s came along, it was really clear it was time to go. It was time to move. And so they sold the building on their 50 years old, back in 1987, sold the building and moved up here to Byron Center with a vision. And the vision was that they would leave behind kind of a dying town, and they would move to a town that was certainly had a lot more future, a lot more things in store for it, which is Byron Center. So they leave behind the comforts and the conveniences of a building with nice plush pews. Were there cushions on the pews back then? I don't know, but anyway, probably not. Okay, so anyway, they had this nice plush building, everything was ready, and yet now they had to come in and start setting up chairs every single Sunday. And they would set up chairs. They'd meet at the high school, what's now Nichols School. And they would do this and for a course of a couple years. And the question was, what do we have? There was no property. They sold a building and moved to nothing. There was no property. There was nothing in the works. And the question was, okay, Lord, what are you going to do? So they were looking at what we can buy, what we can afford. They had the sale of the building, so they had some money. What can we do? And for 2 years, the church met over at the school, questioning, Lord, what's going to happen? Nowhere was it on the agenda that God is going to give Frontline Bible Church today, our name today, give them free property. How many of you think that God gives just free property out? There was this farmer who decided that he wanted to help out, and there was some connections that were made with one of the families in the church. And through this process, not only did the farmer give us the property, but he actually gave us the first right of refusal on part of the property that's up there on 84th Street right now. And that was an opportunity that came along. Only God could have orchestrated that whole thing. And so in 1989, this building, that building out there was built. There was the birth of a vision. But then, over the course of 2 years, it's like, Lord, we thought that if we moved, everything was going to be just fine. And then God says, let me provide. Birth of a vision, death of a vision, God's provision. Like we talked about, though, last week, the hardest part is when we have the birth and we're so excited and we can see God working and we can see God planning and we got a vision for our family and we got a vision for our marriage and we got a vision for our work and we got a vision for our retirement and we got a vision for the church. We got all these plans and all we need God to do is sign on the dotted line and everything will be perfect, right? And then God says, yeah, I got other plans for you. And then that vision that dies and we say, God, where are you at? And then we're looking. God, how are you going to provide? God, how are you going to provide? Let me give you a real world example. It was back in June. We bought a car. We have a vision for this car, and this car is going to replace the current car that we had, my car. And it was going to be perfect. I got a great deal on this car. And sure enough, the time came, we're going to bring it back from Baltimore. Where it's got no rust on it. It's got a lot of miles, but it's got no rust. It's a one-owner car. It should be great. Driving it, my brother-in-law drives it from Baltimore back up to here. He makes it as far as Toledo when the transmission goes out. My vision of this good car is now all of a sudden I'm looking at having to replace the transmission in this car. And so through the course of time, I'm able to find out. So God brings along this good mechanic. This good mechanic, kind of a backyard mechanic, and he's able to take and find this. We got a great deal on a used transmission. We got the car, and everything looks like it's perfect, right? And so then we go to sell. This thing should sell. I talked to my neighbor. He's a used car buyer for different places. He says, oh, those cars sell like hotcakes. Perfect. I love this thing. Go down. We get a 60-day registration, temporary registration, okay? 60-day temporary registration. We got that because I don't need to buy a license plate. I'm going to sell this thing in no time once we got so much money into this. Yeah, you're laughing because you know what's coming next. 60 days goes by, right? Well, all we need is 30 more days. So we're going to go down to the DMV or Secretary of State. We're going to go down, get the 30-day registration thing, put that out, because this thing is going to sell like this. Well, we just passed that last Thursday. Car still hasn't sold. How nervous do you get when things don't go your way? How nervous do you get when your plans are not working out right? Do you go into like, okay, I trusted you, God, for 60 days, but I gave you an additional 30. Just because I like you. That's why I did it. But now that this 90 days, and you had 90 days, now that 90 days is over, I got to take over from here, God. I got to get this thing done. And then we stress, and we freak out, don't we? And that's when we maybe lose our appetite, and we're staring at the bottom line, and we're going, Lord, what are you doing? How much do we trust that God has an agenda that He is working out in your life, and He's working it out in mine? See, here's the thing that I want you to see today. God's provision comes at the end of our vision and the death of our vision. And this is what I want you to see. God's provision can come in various forms. And as long as we understand this, sometimes it gives us the ability to maybe handle the stress that we're under. And so that's where we're going to look at Moses today. And we're going to see from Moses' life there in Exodus chapter 3 and 4, hopefully some forms, and I'm not saying that these forms are exhaustive by any means, okay? I think God's provision can take multiple forms. But I want you to give you 3 forms today that maybe will stick in your brain a little bit so that when you're sitting there at the end of that vision of that you have that just died, and you're sitting there and you're going, how do I even process this? And you can say, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? It may be something else, but it will give us the ability to go and do what we talked about last week, and that is from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. That's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Hopefully today, some of this will bring some clarity. So Exodus, we end up right here in Exodus chapter, I'll just give you a brief recap of 2, toward the end of 2. You have Moses, and he had thought God had given him a vision. And the vision was that Moses was going to lead the people of Israel, lead the Hebrews out of Egypt where they were enslaved and they were in trouble. And Moses was the man. And Moses says, look at this. I'm in Pharaoh's court. I've got access to Pharaoh himself. I can help the people go. Not to mention, I'm Hebrew, but I'm not a slave. I kind of have this leadership thing. I have all the tools necessary to help God in this world. Because I'll bet you God needs my help. He's been waiting for a guy like me. So we have all the ideas. Moses has the ideas, and he says, okay, here's my chance. And he sees a Egyptian slave driver beating one of the Hebrews, and he goes over to him, looks around, and he's like, yeah, don't do that ever again. And he kills him. And not only does he kill him, he buries him right away, buries the evidence, thinking nobody saw the whole thing. And this will prove eventually that he's one of them. He's one of the Hebrews, and he wants to help them, and he'll be their Savior. That's what he wants. And sure enough, he goes to tell them, okay, guys, here it is. Stop fighting. He sees two Hebrews fighting with each other. He says, stop fighting amongst yourselves. You're Hebrews. Don't do this. And they say, who do you think you are? You're going to tell us to stop fighting, and you just killed somebody the other day? Really? You have the right to tell us to stop fighting? And Moses goes, oh, they know. And he gets fearful of Pharaoh. And he beats feet out of town, and he heads out to a place called Midian, on the backside of the desert. And he heads over there, and it's there that he thinks, I'm going to escape Pharaoh, I'm going to escape those crazy Hebrews, I got to get away. And we just picture, as he's going all the way to Midian, just muttering along the way, God, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I had your plans. I had such a great idea for you, and you didn't even come through for me. Who do you think you are? And he ends up on the far side, the backside of the desert, meets a family, ends up getting married, has a couple kids, and interestingly enough, one of the kids that he has, he names him Gershom, there in verse 22 of chapter 2, because he wanted a reminder. Every time he said the name Gershom, he would think to himself, I have become an alien in a foreign land. God's vision is dead. And that's where we pick up in chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses thought that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, how many of you, if you heard a bush talking, would freak out? You know, Moses, the bush talks to him and says, Moses, Moses, and he goes, oh, yeah, hey, what's up? And it's then that God says, it's me, God, and he goes, oh, no. I mean, if a bush talked to me, I think I would have said, oh, no. But Moses is somehow not fearful of the bush, but he is fearful when he realizes it's God in the bush. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Interestingly, what was Moses' vision that he thought God was leading him to? He thought the vision was Moses would lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, right? He has this idea, maybe God has called me to lead the people out of Israel, or out of Egypt. That was the vision, right? And what happened to Moses' vision of leading the people out of Israel, out of Egypt? Did it again. I'm going to get it right. What happened to Moses' vision? It died, right? Now God comes along and says, I got a vision for you, Moses. I want you to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt. 40 years later. See, that's what we find out. We don't read it here in Exodus chapter 2. We read about it in Exodus chapter 7. We find out that when Moses left Egypt the first time, he was 40 years old. When Moses gets the burning bush experience, guess how old he is? 80. How many of you here today are over 80? A few. I'm not asking how old you feel, Cliff. I'm asking how old you are. Okay. It's interesting to me that God in His infinite wisdom, says, I got a new chapter of life for you, Moses. You think you're on the downhill slide, man. You think 80 years old, it's now too old. He says, I want you. I've got a job for you. And I want you to lead my people out of Egypt because now's the time. You know, you had this vision 40 years ago thinking that God was going to use you to lead the people of Israel. That vision wasn't wrong. It wasn't ready. But now, here's the vision. I'm going to use you to lead the people out. And isn't that awesome? Here's the thing. This is the thing that we can learn about God's provision. See, God was providing back in Exodus chapter 2, but what Moses didn't realize is there was something that had to take place first. And that is preparation. God's visions, God's provision, at times simply looks like preparation. Now, you guys know what I'm talking about here. You don't just wake up one morning and say, today's the day to build a house. So you drive down to Menards and Home Depot, and you get all your stuff, and by noon, you've already started building your house, right? It's just like that, right? You know, you got all the stuff, and by the end of the day, you got yourself a house ready to move into, right? Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? No. How long do houses take? 7 days, right? Just like, Extreme Home Makeover. In 7 days, you can do a whole house. But it's the months of preparation and all that sort of stuff that go into it. When you and I go and say, we want somebody to build our house, oftentimes it takes 3, 4, 6 months to get that house built. If you try to do it yourself, like 6 years, maybe. It takes time to prepare, to get ready to see this vision come to fruition. And so what's taking place during this preparation time? Well, I want you to see some things. Well, first of all, what we find out, Moses wasn't ready. That's a tough pill to swallow because for Moses, he's 40 at the prime of his life, right? He's got all the right connections. He's got Moses. He's living there in Pharaoh's court. He's smarter than a whip because he was trained to lead the nation. That's what he was trained for. He's got everything ready to go. But God looked at him and said, Moses, you're not ready yet. But God, I think I am ready. I have the right skills and abilities, right? God says, no, there are some things I still need you to learn. If you remember back in chapter 2, when the people came and they said, who made you ruler and judge, Moses? Who do you think you are trying to lead us? That would be the beginning of an awful lot of criticism. How many of you like to be criticized? For how many of you is there this thing inside of you that says, how dare you tell me that what I'm doing is wrong or that it's off or something? Now, Moses would find out as first 40 years in Pharaoh's court. The second 40 years, he's a shepherd tending sheep out in the backlands of Midian. For the last 40 years, Moses would get gray hair after gray hair after gray hair because of these crazy people that God saddled him with. And there would be numerous times where Moses would say, really, God? Those people? Are you sure? God had to prepare him to receive criticism. Another thing he needed to learn. He needed to learn how to experience hardship. For 40 years of his life, he lived in Pharaoh's court. He had all the good life. He had all those things. In fact, if you keep your finger here in Exodus, I want you to turn over to Hebrews toward the end of your Bible. It's interesting that what we find here in Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews 11, verse 23. Not verse 23, 25, I'm sorry. I guess you look at 24. By faith Moses, verse 24, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He was in Pharaoh's court. He had access to wine, women, song, whatever it was, he had access to that. And yet his experience was definitely not in a desert. How in the world would God use a guy who had never spent a day outside of Pharaoh's court to lead a people of Israel to wander around in the desert for 40 years? You know how he did it? By letting Moses wander around the desert for 40 years. It's interesting, the mountain of God, Horeb, is also known as Mount Sinai. The very mountain where God took Moses and hung out with him and gave him the burning bush experience was the very same mountain that God would say, "You lead my people to Mount Sinai." You ever thought about that? That oftentimes God prepares us by taking us places we don't want to go in order to be able to take others places they don't want to go. But because we've been there and we've realized there's still life where we don't want to go, we're able to go to somebody and say, "You're not going to die." See, preparation is hard, but we look at it, and during those 40 years, how many times, I'm sure, did Moses look back and go, "Oh, Lord, this plan that you have me on is dumb." You ever thought that? God's plan? Lord, this makes no sense. It is dumb. Is it possible that God is simply in the preparation phase of His provision? Some other things. Moses thinks he can handle situations in his own way. He thinks that God has called him because he's super smart. You ever thought about that? That you look and you say, "God, obviously you want to use people like me because, man, I am smart. I'm a good problem solver. Oh, I got great people skills. You must be wanting to use me because I have good people skills. You must be wanting to use me because I got money. You must be wanting to use me because I got personality, I got power, I got influence. That must be why you want to use me." And isn't it interesting, though, when you look in the Bible, so often, who does God use? He uses the people that don't make any sense, right? He didn't call you because you're that good, or that smart, or that good looking. He chose you because He simply wants to use you, and He wants to get the glory. And when you think that you're God's gift to Him, that's when God says, "I got to prepare you." He needed to learn his own inadequacies. This is a really funny part of the Bible. I want you to turn to Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, so just 2 books over to the right from Exodus. Numbers chapter 12. Humor. I find this incredibly humorous. Numbers 12. In verse 3. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Who wrote the book of Numbers? Isn't it odd to you? I mean, a little bit. I just think it's so funny that, man, I am a very humble man. I am proud of my humility. I'm telling you, I am proud of my humility. Obviously, this must have been some sort of an editorial comment added in there at some point in some way. But I do find it odd that when you look at Moses, especially early on in his life, what you don't see is a humble man. You see a man who thought he had the world by the tail, and he was the one who was going to change it. And yet, even as we come to this, and if we were to read here in Numbers chapter 12, which we don't have time to do, but you would find that when the complaining came, Moses, he puts his hand up and basically in surrender. God, you need to do something. I am not going to assert my power and influence in this. You must do something. Let me tell you, that was a time of preparation. So in some ways, it was preparing Moses. There's another side of it, though, and that is preparing the people. Were the people ready back in Exodus chapter 2 when Moses was at the prime of his life? You see, Moses wasn't ready. He had to go through some stuff. The other thing was the people really weren't ready. It's interesting that it's not until verse 220 and look at verse 23 of chapter 2. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. It's interesting that what we don't see is early on in the process. We don't find that early on in the process, when babies were getting killed and everything else, what we don't see is in the text. We don't find the people saying, God, we need you. We are struggling here. We're lost. We really need you. They were complaining, they were arguing, but they really weren't turning their hearts and their brains and say, God, we need you. We are desperate for you. It's not until longer into the process in which it seems, based on what the text says, it's not until longer into the process, after Moses had already left, after he was on the backside of the desert, that's when it seems like they finally go, probably should talk to God about this. Were the people desperate enough to say, God, man, I need you? Or were they still in self-help? We got to figure this thing out mode. Here's an interesting one. If you turn back to Genesis chapter 15, Genesis 15 and verse 6. Genesis 15, verse 6. I'm sorry, verse 16. Genesis 15, verse 16. God is speaking to Abraham. It was God's covenant with him. I'm going to make you a great nation, all these things, all these amazing things are going to take place. And yet here in verse 16, he says, verse 15, you, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age, Abraham. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Now, we're not going to spend much time talking about the fourth generation here. How is that? Is it possible that Abraham's fourth generation descendants were possibly maybe still alive when they left Egypt? Maybe there were some really old ones there. We don't know. We don't know exactly on the details there. But I want you to look at the end part, because it says, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. God says, in my time, I will tell you when they are ready to go. You see, what God was doing while the people of Israel were in Egypt, God was allowing the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and all those people to let their wickedness reach the full measure. And there was no way that Israel could occupy the land of Canaan until God says, now they're ready. So not only was God preparing Moses, not only was God preparing the Hebrews, God was also actually preparing the land of Canaan so that when God says, now when all these three things come together, now is the time, then it would be the right time. Preparation, though, is so hard because we look at it and we say, God, where are you at? It is this phase, I believe, that it is the hardest to see God. I really do. And so I'll ask you this morning, for how many of you has your vision died? You had a vision for what your life was going to look like. You had a vision for what your retirement and your kids and all this sort of stuff. And it's dead. And you're going, God, where are you even at? I'm struggling to see how all these things go together. Because I had the greatest of plans, and now it looks like you're not doing anything. I want to ask you, is it possible that today God is preparing you possibly for the greatest ministry of your life that is yet to come? And He's working the details and working the details, and He's putting these people into your life, and He's taking these people out of your life, and He's allowing you to have this experience and not have that experience, and He's bringing all these things, and He's simply putting this stuff into place. I've talked about this in the past, and that is this idea of collecting the dots and connecting the dots. Have you ever done one of those dot-to-dot things, you know? You see a bunch of dots on a page, and then it's got a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you just follow the numbers. Oftentimes you look at it and go, it's obvious I know what this is. But sometimes they're hard. And you're looking, you're going, what even is this? And so you start going, well, if those numbers weren't on the page, if those numbers weren't there, you would be lost. But instead, the person who is drawing it up gave you those numbers, and then you start going, oh, no way. But here's the way God operates. He only gives us a few numbers at a time, doesn't he? He doesn't put all the numbers in the end and he says, there it is, there's your life. I know you're only 20, but I got all your numbers all the way back up there. This is your life. Instead, what does he do? You sit there and you study the page. Lord, what are you doing? And all of a sudden, something happens and you go, oh, I see a little bit more. There it is. And it gives us the confidence and the ability to trust God. So maybe right now, you're in the preparation phase. Here's another one. Maybe right now you're in the desperation phase. There's preparation and then there's desperation. Yeah. This week, how many of you said a prayer that looked kind of like this? Oh, God, I have no idea how any of this is going to work out. Maybe it wasn't this past week. Maybe it was in the last month. And you're just like, Lord, I don't have the clue what is going on here. Is it possible that God is bringing you to the end of you? If we look back in Moses, think about it. Moses' vision was he was going to save the people of Israel out of Egypt. I give up. Save the people of Israel out of Egypt. So what does God do? Where's Egypt? Off to the west, right? Down in Africa. Where does he send Moses? To Midian, the backside of the desert. He brings Moses about as far away from Egypt as you can be. And that's when he says, that's when I want to use you. Moses knows God's going to use me. So what does he do? He lets him age a little bit. See, if I were to go to you today and I were to say, okay, those of you who are 80 and older, get ready. God's about to do something. And how many of you would say, yeah, right, go pick somebody younger. I don't have the energy to be used now that I'm in my 80s. Back when I was in my 50s, maybe, 40s, yeah, definitely. But now that I'm in my 80s, what if God only used 80-plus-year-olds? Wouldn't that be awesome? We would see all this preparation right when 80 years old comes. Then the prime of life happens from God's perspective. Instead, what do we usually view 80? Once you get into your 80s and above, that's when ministry is winding down, right? Is it possible, though, that God wants you to be at the end of yourself so that when he gives you this incredible ministry, it's obvious to everybody it was God who did it, not you? That's desperation. Where's Moses? Backside of the desert, middle of nowhere, far from Egypt, 80 years old. Did he have access to Moses' court right now? No. He's out there 40 years. He's a shepherd. People even hate the shepherds. And also, they remembered back there that he had killed the Egyptian person. All the signs were pointing, you are done, man. Your life is over. Instead, what happens? God says, now's the time. So what's Moses' response? All right, let's go. Let's go get him. Right? Isn't that what Moses did? No. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. What does Moses start doing? Who am I? Chapter 3, verse 11, if you go back here. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? I mean, come on. Look at me. I'm old now. I'm back here. I killed a man. I'm a murderer. Who am I that I should be used of you? And then God says, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So then Moses starts listing the objections in verse 13. Suppose I go to them and I tell them, hey, it's time to go. Who should I say sent them? Tell them it's me. I am who I am. This is who sent you. Well, what is your name? My name is I am. Oh boy, I'm not sure about that. If we jump down to chapter 4, Verse 1, Moses answered, well, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? And they say, the Lord did not appear to you. I mean, can you imagine if somebody walked into this church and said, it's time to sell the building? It's time to sell the building, get rid of all of it. It's just time to move out and do something different. We're going to a brand new place. We don't know exactly. We need to trust God in all this, right? Somebody says that when they walk into Frontline Bible Church on a Sunday morning and they say, God sent me to tell you that. What would your response be? Nah, yeah, right. No, I'm serious. What's his name? I am sent me to tell you. Sell the building. Put it on the market tomorrow. Does that really make sense? That's what's going on in our head. And it's the same thing that Moses expected the people of Israel to do. So what does he tell them? Well, what's in your hand? He takes the staff, throws it down, becomes a snake. He says, put your hand in your coat like Napoleon. Put it in there, pull it out. It's leprous. Put it back in. It comes out. It's fine. Pour some water on the ground. It turns to blood. Excuses. What's your name? They won't listen. After all this, verse 10, O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. God says to Moses, who gave you the mouth to speak? Who is it that handles things? What is the situation? Now go. I understand you come up with these objections. I'm too old. Who am I? God, what am I going to do to prove to them? I'm not even a good communicator. I can't even do any of these things. And Moses answers, or God answers everyone, do this, do this, do this. Now just go and do it. And what's Moses' final reply? All right, I guess I'll go. What's verse 13? But Moses says, oh Lord, I'm tired of arguing with you. Just send somebody else. You keep answering my objections. This just comes down to, I don't want to do it. Yeah, you ever been there with God? God keeps setting you up, putting you in the right position, giving you opportunities. Everything seems to be working out. You have confidence, you have clarity. It's like God is leading you, and finally it just reaches down to a decision of the will. Are you going to do it or are you not? And we look at Moses and we say, Moses, oh, what a lame guy. Why would he not just follow God and do it, just like I would have done if I were there? Right? Right. But instead, what's the situation? So often we're just like Moses. God, you want me to hang on to this little car that I got, thinking that it was your... You want me to hang on to this for a little bit longer? I don't want to do it. I need the money. I need to sell this thing. I'm going to kick this sucker in high gear because you're doing nothing about it. I want myself a girlfriend. I don't personally, but envision it, okay? I want myself a girlfriend. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired. I'm ready. The clock is ticking. I'm tired of living the way that I am, and I keep trusting you. All right, God, I know you're doing this. I know you're doing this, but I've trusted you long enough, and now I'm desperate. Match.com. There it is. I'm just going to go on here. Not even a Christian box. I'm not even going to check the Christian box. I'm just going to trust that I can figure this whole thing out. What is going on? And God says, I want you to come to the very, 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 very end, because once you're desperate, then you'll see me. And that's what happens with Moses. Moses, he had his excuses. He had his efforts. All of those things finally came to the end when Moses says, okay, I'll go. The last one. Illumination. The lights go on. Here's the thing, though. It's beginning to make sense. God's going to do the work. That's what Moses sees. It's beginning to make sense. I get it. Okay, God, I'm willing to trust you. I don't want to do this, but you know what? Now I see it. I see what you're trying to do, but eventually it really comes down just like verse 13. Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. And God has to say, now do it. Even with all the evidence, even with all the reasons, even with all that sort of stuff, even sometimes when God prepares us and we see that it's right here in front of us, still at times I have to come down to a decision. It takes just flat out obedience at times. What does God say to Moses? Here's what I want you to see. When Moses is giving his objections, one of the things that he says back to him is he says, Moses, look at what is in your hand. Here's Moses as he's leaning on his staff because he's 80 years old. Okay, I just pictured you cane people around here. He's leaning on his staff because he's old. And he's struggling. He's thinking, Lord, what are you doing? He's leaning on his staff there, and God's talking to him, as he's just trying to come up with all the reasons and excuses. And God finally just says, Moses, what's in your hand? Just this dumb staff. He said, I want you to take that thing, and I want you to just put it back down on the ground. Put it down on the ground. Whoa, a snake! I had no idea that there was a snake that was living in my staff. I had no idea. Instead, God takes this and he says, now Moses, I want you to grab the snake by the tail and pick it back up. Boom! All of a sudden he's got a staff again. I had no idea there was a staff that was living in that snake. You see, God can take anything and use it for his glory. So many of you know what I'm talking about. You got crap in your past, and I know it. And I said the word crap, I know that. I didn't say the other word. You got a bunch of junk, and you think, God, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? That seems like something I should be ashamed of. It seems like something that I should just try to forget, that I could never do anything with that. That was a horrible time in my life. I look back at that and I say, I don't want to remember that. Tragedy, stupid decisions, forget it, whatever else. And it's interesting that oftentimes God says, that's what I want to use. You see, I've been preparing you. I've been making you desperate. And now I want you to see something. Now, the very thing that you've been holding all along thinking this sucker is useless, this is how I'm going to use you to make an eternal impact. But it still requires obedience. Are you going to step out in faith and take that thing that you feel is worthless? And you're going to say, God, how do you want me to use this? How do you want me to use these experiences? How do you want me to use these dumb decisions? How do you want me to use these tragedies? How do you want me to use this, God? As he turned the lights on, it eventually comes down to the place, will you obey and just do it? You see, we're going to see this throughout the life of Moses and throughout all the twists and the turns. God will turn the lights on and God will explain some things to us eventually, and we will see things. But eventually it comes down to this. Do I trust God to use it, and will I follow no matter what? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. And as he provides, as he makes these paths straight path may look today like preparation. Your straight path today may look like desperation. He's trying to bring you to the end of yourself. Or your straight path today may look like illumination, where you see something and God brings perspective that you never had. But eventually, I want you to see, God's provision takes various forms. Just because the form doesn't look like the final answer doesn't mean God hasn't provided. Do you trust God today just the way you are? Do you trust your plans more than God's plans? Or today, do you make a decision and you say this, I submit my plans to your plans? And I get it. This is this exact same thing I said last week. But I want you to remember it. I want you to remember it. I want me to remember it. When I'm struggling to say, God, what are you doing? Why do I still have this red car? God, why do I still have no girlfriend? God, why do I still not have these things figured out? Where did my money go? Where did the family go? God, why? I submit my plans to your plans. Help me not to stress. Help me to see that you may be preparing me. Help me to see that you just want me, not all my gifts, not all my strength, you just want me Help me to see that whatever it is you bring along my life, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, you can use it. I submit to you. May that be your prayer today. Birth of a vision, death of a vision, God's provision. I'm going to ask the band to come on up as we close out our service in prayer. May we, as Frontline Bible Church, especially as we think about God's agenda for us. God provided this awesome building. He did. He provided this beautiful piece of property right here in Byron Center. God has provided all of you. God put all these pieces together for His reason, for His purposes. Do we trust that God is working His agenda out? I sure hope so today. Let's all stand together as we close in prayer. God, it is a privilege to be able to see things like Moses' life. We see the big picture in Moses. We can look at the end. All we have to do is flip through the chapters and flip through the books, and we can see how the end of the story worked out. And it's just such a cool story. There were twists and turns along the way, but boy, you did some amazing things. But that's a privilege that we don't see in our own life. We don't know what the end really does look like. I don't even know what today really looks like. So God, I just pray that just like Moses, even when the twists and the turns come, even when we're tempted to wonder, Lord, what are you doing? I just pray, God, that we would see your hand at work, that we would look back on the ways in which you have worked and we've seen it, and that we would be confident and faithful to follow you because we do believe you're in control. May we trust you with all of our heart. May we lean not on our own understanding. And may you make our path straight and give us the opportunity to see you at work in it. In Jesus' name we pray, and all those in agreement said, amen.